So I want to talk to you a little bit about the scaling of this. So you should have worked on it separately and then come together to discuss your answers because your perspectives are important here. Each person has a voice in how they perceive what's going on in their relationship. And having good conversation about that, Scott mentioned sending out the PDF on safety, right? And so as you're having conversations about your relationship that enter into that zone where like, ooh, this could go bad, then we want you to be able to understand safety and how to be a safe person in which your husband or your wife can share difficult things. If you, when we are looking at scaling in relationships, when we're listening to couples and we're asking them, hey, how do you sort of scale out your relationship right now? 0 being terrible, we're out of here. 10 being, we're doing really, really great. I mean, I can't think of anything at all that would need to be changed. We're listening for numbers above 5 and we're listening for numbers below 5. We want our couples to have growing couples, thriving couples. Their numbers should be above 5. They should be up in this zone on the regular, okay? If they are below that, so if more questions rank below 5 for you than they do above 5, then there's some serious work to be looked at. There's some deeper things to be discussed and to look at. We encourage you to grab a mentor couple that you can talk about these things with. But what we know and what we believe is that there is nothing that is impossible with God. You might be 0 on all of these. And at one time, Scott and I were very much, we were big fat zeros, okay? But for us now, all of our numbers are above 5. And they waver. There are just times where we're not up in the 9s, and there are times where we're at 5, and I'm like, man, I'm 5, but I'm tempted to give us a 4. That's okay, it's just a scale. But this helps you to periodically evaluate your level, your culture of honor in your home. So that's how that scaling works. And a good question to ask as you are processing this is, hey, what can I do to help us move our number up 1? Just 1. What would be one thing that we can do to do that? And so let's move into what we're going to talk about today, because this is one way that Scott and I really believe that we have kept our numbers above 5. Is that we reconnect regularly. We reconnect regularly. And couples who thrive make it an intentional effort to reconnect regularly. Why is regular reconnection important? Well, the natural tendency of any relationship without intentionality is toward drift. So if you can imagine that you are in a canoe, okay, and you're in a river and you're going somewhere. Okay, you've got a destination in mind, and you're together in that canoe, and you want to get to that destination. What happens if y'all take your paddle out of the water and just go with the flow? It just floats. That's right. Okay. If you're not strategic about those paddles, you're not going to get to your destination. In fact, you're liable to end up tumped over on the banks, all the canoe references that I don't know about that I'm trying to make, but you paddlers know what I'm talking about, right? So what we're encouraging, reconnecting regularly is a way to keep your paddle in the water, to keep you away from drift. You've heard it said that familiarity breeds contempt. What we see is that familiarity breeds complacency. That sense in us of it's not that we don't care, but we're not attentive to it. So what are some signs of complacency and drift? How can you know if we've got some complacency and drift trying to creep into our relationship? One is that we take our partner's presence for granted. We take our partner's presence for granted. We just think they're going to be there. We have in our mind that we're going to be married for a long, long time, and I pray that we all are. But the reality is that we just don't know. We really don't. Some of our very dearest college friends, Danny and Julie Durham. Danny went out for a jog, and he jogged right into the gates of heaven. Had no idea, right? He was the healthiest one of us. We don't know really how long that we will be together. And we begin to take our partner for granted, that they're going to be here, and what they bring, the good things that they bring to the table, we start to take all of that for granted. Number 2, assumptions replace appreciation and affirmations. We just think, hey, they already know this. They know this. I don't have to say it. I don't have to tell them. They already know this. Scott did a men's conference. No, maybe was it a men's conference
No,
in
it was
Brooklyn?
down in Statesboro. It was back in the 90s when the 5 love languages had just been released, and I was asked to come to this small country church in Brooklyn, outside of Brooklyn. And it was a largely older men in the room, and I was teaching. The daughter of one of the men said, would you go teach the men the 5 love languages? I said, sure, I'll go teach them. And we were going through the love languages, and one of the men in the audience that morning said to me, I told my wife on the day that we got married, I loved her. And if anything changed, I would let her know.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one way to do it. We don't encourage it, but that is one way. That's one way to do it. But we know that that affirmations and appreciations have to be a part of the rhythm of a culture of honor in terms of things that are spoken or communicated. Hey, I see you, I appreciate what you do, and I affirm what you do. And it not only helps the relationship, but it helps you. Look, there's enough in our relationship that is challenging. And if we put our focus on that, then we will begin to see our relationship as broken, largely broken. What we believe is that when we look for the good in the relationship, we find the good in the relationship. And when we say the good in the relationship, we feel the good in the relationship. Do you understand what I'm saying? The next thing is that we expect our partner to simply just play their role. You know, don't rock the boat. This is the way it is. I just expect you to do what your part. Just do your part. I'm just going to do my part. Let's don't rock the boat. Let's just do what we need to do. The next one is that if there's drift and complacency in the relationship, 95% of the conversations that take place are about the kids, the cash, the calendar, and the career. Drift happens when we only spend time talking about those things. The relational side of us begins to slip away, and we don't really even know it. Scott shares a story of when he was a kid on Tybee Island, out in the ocean on a tractor tire back in the day where we were tough, and you floated on real inner tube tractor tires that had the thing on it that scraped your side. You know what I mean? How many of you know what I mean? Okay, yeah, that's right. Those were the days, okay? And they're out there playing and having a great time. And when they look up, the familiarity of where they were was nowhere to be seen. The current had taken them way down the beach. This is what happens when we just focus on making life go. The undercurrent of our relationship, the undercurrent sweeps us away so that what we desired, the home base that we desired to be in when we got married, which was our relationship, and a healthy one and a growing one, we lose sight of that completely. That's why one of the largest segments of the population that we tend to deal with who lose their way, who check out, who have a lot of complacency, where they have a lot of drift and are actually ready to be on out, are empty nesters. They have had no intentionality on the relational side of things. They've just been making life go. And so when all the kids pick up and leave, they don't really have much to draw on. The next thing that is a sure sign of drift and complacency is that separating thoughts are allowed to linger. And this is what I mean by separating thoughts. And all of us have them, because we get in conflict with each other. We also, live with someone who has different habits than us. Squeezes from the bottom, a free squeezer, right? Spreads mayonnaise with a spoon, spreads mayonnaise with a knife.
As it should be.
No, spoons are better. You just flip it on the bread and flip up, it's just better. You don't get your hand all in the mayonnaise. Anyway, those differences, all right, see? We can have some funny separating thoughts. But then we can also have separating thoughts of, he's never going to love me. I had that for sure. He's never going to care about me. I had that for sure. He's always going to think, blah, blah, blah. This is something that I adopted it into my belief system. Scott had it too. God, I'm good with you. You're good with me. I'm good. But Dawn needs to get her act together. That's a separating thought. And we will live separated here a long time before we live separated here. Mm-hmm. People don't just wake up in the morning and go, I'm out. I'm going. They've been living a separated thought life before that. And so a sure sign of drift means that we are allowing separated thoughts to linger instead of addressing them, instead of dealing with them, and then bringing that unity of thought back together. The way we see each other, remember, determines how we treat each other. So bringing that thought life back into unified thought is very, very important for us. So those are the signs of drift. So how can a couple avoid drift and complacency in their relationship? By reconnecting regularly.
Yeah. And so when we talk about regular reconnection, we're going to break it down in two specific areas. One is in understanding, and two is in intimacy. I want to go back before we go there, though, to what Dawn was just saying, because as she was talking about these separating thoughts, I know for many of us, here's a good sign to know if you have a separating thought, is if you begin comparing your spouse to someone else. You may not say it verbally, but you begin comparing, looking at her compared to her, whoever the other her is. And why can't she be more like her? That's a good sign for you to know if you're living a separated thought life mentally, because as Dawn says, it's going to happen here before it happens outward. Inward comes out, okay? So we're going to reconnect regularly, first through understanding. Read this with me. This is in your guide. This passage from 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 7. This is in the New American Standard. Read it aloud. You husbands, likewise, live with your wives in an understanding way, as with someone weaker, since she is a woman, and show her honor as a fellow heir of the grace of life, so that your prayers will not be hindered. Understanding requires both a knowledge of and acceptance of our differences. Let me just say, as Dawn said, we did a teaching years ago here that I just made a list of all of our differences, from how much toilet paper I use compared to how much she uses, how we spread mayonnaise, how we squeeze toothpaste, where we dry off, all the differences that we did. And you can compile, if you want to, as many lists of differences as you can. But let me just tell you this, if you look at those differences as a barrier, it's going to begin creating separating thoughts for you. If you look at those differences as a bridge, okay, she does it this way, I prefer it this way. How do we Diamond Rio it and meet somewhere in the middle, right? Because listen, we said this last night, guys. Differences often in marriage are simply differences. They're not unbiblical issues. They're not illegal issues. They're not unethical or unmoral issues. It's really not even a violation of your conscience. It's just, she does it this way, I like it this way. But as Paul said, that is a great place for us to learn, how can I accept this person as being different from me? And not let it create a barrier between us, but a bridge. Understanding requires both a knowledge of and acceptance of our differences. Let me ask you, do you accept the reality that your partner is different from you? I'm not talking about sinful behaviors, things like that. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about things that are not unbiblical or immoral. They're just different. Can you learn? That was the key piece when God spoke to me in the early 90s through Philippians chapters 2, 3, and 4. Chapters 2, verses 3 and 4. The key piece that God was trying to help me see, guys, is I needed to learn to accept Dawn just as God in Christ had accepted me. Romans 15:7 says this, wherefore accept one another. It means to bring into. Not just, yeah, I accept that. No, I'm going to bring this in close to me. Wherefore accept one another just as God in Christ has accepted you. Jesus accepted you and me when we were very unacceptable. And so that is how we are to model, as Paul was talking about, guys. This idea of sanctification is learning to accept one another's differences. Understanding is a gift that we give to one another. It's a gift because, as I said last night, fellas, your job and my job is to become a student of our spouse, to study them, not to critique them, but to study them, to understand them. Now, let me break that word understanding down that Paul's talking about here. Comprehension and understanding are two different things. I've lived with Dawn now for almost 38 years, and I can tell you when X happens, this is how she's going to respond. I comprehend that she's going to do that, but I still don't understand why she does that. It's different. So don't get caught up in this whole thing of understanding that you've got to fully grasp it. Dawn grieves different than I do. We celebrate things differently. She cares deeply, not that I am uncaring. We've learned in our ministry here at Lakewood, we have to limit the number of people that have access to both me and Dawn. Don't hear that in a wrong way. But Dawn loves and cares so deeply, she will be awake at night thinking about you and praying for you. I love you, but I'm going to sleep sound. We're different. We're different.
Go back to that word understanding or the very first part of the verse, and it says, in an understanding way. That's a very important distinction, is that our manner that we conduct ourselves with one another in regard to our differences is noted here. Our manner needs to be in an understanding way. That means we don't shut somebody off or put somebody down because they do something different or because they feel a different way. That our manner is towards them is working toward understanding, working towards, help me understand why you feel that way. And I may never understand, and Scott definitely doesn't understand everything all the time about me. And that's fine, okay? That's part of the mystery of relationship. That kind of keeps us.
You are a mystery.
I know it. I am happy to be. And so this is important for us to understand is what our manner is like, an understanding way.
Yeah. And see, understanding each other ensures that our fellowship with God is not hindered. Look at this with me, fellas. Look at this. Go back up to the verse. And show her honor. We talked about the culture of honor last night, honoring humbly. Honor her as a fellow heir of the grace of life. Listen, in other words, just because she, as we talked about last night, she is a child of God. She is a creation of God that bears her, the image of God. If for no other reason, that is worthy of dignity and honor. And because that's the position that we then approach our spouse, show her honor as a fellow heir of the grace of life. Why? So that your prayers will not be hindered. That's never been lost on me, that what is happening here is influenced and affected by what's happening here. Let me just ask you, do you personally feel disconnected from God? I'm not asking, that's rhetorical, but just think about it. And I'm not saying this is the reason, but it could be a reason. If you feel disconnected vertically to God, could it be that you feel disconnected here from your spouse?
Or you're mishandling your spouse,
That's
because
right.
that's really what this passage is talking about. And Peter is writing this in the context of the church because this was at a time where women were not protected or valued at all in society. They had no rights. They needed the protection of a husband to be able to be spoken for, to be able to be represented. And so what Peter is saying here, because the conversation has, we talk about and how the struggle of, wives have to submit to their husbands. Okay, that's really hard to kind of swallow. But the idea of that is, look, you need to be in a safe place, because in the culture that they were in at the time was not a good place for women to be valued or heard from. So what Peter is saying is, hey, don't adopt that attitude, husbands. Okay? Don't adopt the cultural mindset that your wife does not have equal value with you before the Lord. Because if you do, son, you and I are going to have a problem, okay? We used to live in a farmhouse that had a metal roof. And if ever I wanted to make a phone call, then I would have to get up and go outside so that I could find the signal. I didn't call AT&T and say, hey, would you mind moving your signal inside my house so that I don't have to go outside because of this interference in the metal roof? No, I would have to get up and align myself and orient myself to the signal. That's what this is saying, is that God is saying, hey, husbands, I need you to get up and move. Align yourself to my signal, right? Don't sit in the attitude that your wife is not as valuable as you, doesn't have what you have, is different from you, and therefore less than you. So Peter is saying, you, husband, ought to be the safest place for your wife to be, and to see her in the same way that I see her, in grace. So listen, one of the things that a leader, a husband, cannot afford to lose is direct communication with the Father, okay? As a leader, you need that. You can't afford to lose it. But Peter is saying there can be some interference because of how you're handling the woman in your house.
Yeah. So it's a very good question for both of you is when your spouse reacts or responds in a way that you don't understand, is simply ask this: help me understand why. When I said this, you reacted this way. Help me understand that. I don't understand. I'm not critiquing it. I'm not making a judgment of it. I just want to understand and let them explain. And then we'll get later on how to do this further. So we reconnect regularly by understanding. 2, we reconnect regularly by intimacy. And we break intimacy down 3 ways: emotionally, spiritually, and physically. A, emotional. Here we're sharing of feelings, needs, and struggles. This goes back to what we were talking about last night. For a couple to share at this level, if you think of communication, we learned years ago, there's basically 5 levels of communication: cliches, facts, opinions, feelings, and needs. And to share at that deeper level of feelings and need, the 4th and the 5th level, there has to be elements of safety that we put out in the email to you yesterday. If you did not get that email, just see one of us, anybody that's got the Forever shirt, and we'll make sure you get it. But you've got to have those 5 levels, cliches and facts. Anybody can do that. Even the most dysfunctional couple can talk on this level because it's just surface level. Opinions, when you get into things of politics, theology, parenting differences, financial, whatever, it's when you're sharing your opinion is where it gets a little shaky. And so what we're talking about, we want to be able to share at the feelings and need level and even our personal struggles. And there has to be those levels of safety. So if you have not already, I encourage you to go back, read that PDF that we sent to you, because that sets the groundwork, if you will, for how we're going to share intimately with one another. One of the ways that Dawn and I have found over the past several decades of doing this is asking each other just 2 basic questions. First question is simply this: what are you most enjoying about our relationship right now? This is where we're celebrating, we're raising the temperature between one another, that temperature that's being raised because we're focusing on that which is positive. It creates an intimate connection between us. We celebrate that. So we've raised the emotional temperature of the relationship to then allow us to go, not in an undercutting way, to the second question. What are you least enjoying about our relationship right now? And listen, I've learned this, guys. If a couple can connect regularly on these 2 questions at least once a week, you're going to be dealing with issues while they're still a molehill and they've not become a mountain. If you're not taking the time to do this, those little molehills are going to be called what we like to call foxes in the vineyard. They're just nipping at your heels. And those little nipping at your heel foxes that don't get addressed by sharing them openly with one another create what Dawn said as the 5th piece a while ago, separating thoughts.
Couples who thrive don't shy away from hard conversations. They know that having a hard conversation now means that we don't have to have a harder conversation later. They understand that they have to have them, and they are super careful about how they conduct themselves when they are in those conversations. Disagreements don't destroy a marriage. but disrespect does. And if we enter into disagreements and behave disrespectfully, we're going to erode the safety that we so need to have in order to talk about feelings and needs. And Scott's got this down for us. He initiates this probably once a week, and he will say, "So how are we doing, girl?" And I know what that means. That means let's don't talk about the kids, the cash, the calendar, the career, because we're together all the time, all the time. All the time. Did I say that?
I'm her boss.
So he's a pastor of adult discipleship. I serve on his team, and so that technically means he's my boss. So those conversations can be lively, and sometimes they happen in front of our
You heard
team.
how she said it technically means
It technically
that I'm her
means.
boss. Yeah. That was a code word right
yes,
there.
well, technically you are my boss. And so when we have our conversations, and we'd love to talk about those things, like we love to talk about the things we get to do in ministry. We enjoy that so much. But that's not talking about Scott and Dawn. That's not talking about us. So we can be duped into thinking we're having a great relationship, but we're letting something go. There's some kind of drift that's happening underneath. So once a week, whether we're riding down the road or we're at lunch or we're somewhere, he'll say, "How are we doing, girl?" And that's my cue to say whatever I need to say that's underneath the surface. Now, it might have something to do with one of those big things, like, that hurt my feelings, or I'm not sure what I need to do about that, and I need your help to figure that out. It might have something to do with that. But if there's anything between him and me, like, "Listen, I didn't appreciate the way that you said that to me the other day. That really hurt my feelings. When you said that, I felt very unloved when you said that." There are times, even now, because of, we still have wounds. They're pretty well healed, I would say. But there are still times when we have been super busy, when we are spent, and when we haven't had the time to reconnect, that Scott can say something to me that makes me feel like we're right back there in 1993 or 92. Back in those years where we were suffering, I can feel in that moment just like I felt back then. But the Lord helps me to deal with that separating thought, to say, "You're not those people anymore." When he said, I look back and I feel that those are different people. I feel that way about us, right? So having the weekly connection, asking the check-in question, we want to encourage you to develop that habit in your relationship.
Yeah. And the third, this is really the most crucial question out of those questions, is the pivotal question of how can I help you? In other words, what do you need from me, love? What can I take off your plate this week? What is it that you need from me that if I act on it, and listen, that's the pivotal phrase, guys, if I act on it. Let me speak to the men. Few things will hurt your wife's feelings more than she share with you how you can help her and you do nothing with it. Because that basically can communicate to her, you don't care. You really had no intention to do anything about it. When we're working with couples, most couples are not doofuses. You're not doofuses. We were not doofuses. We knew the right thing to do, but we were just unwilling to do it. James 4:17 says it this way: "Therefore, to the one who knows the right thing to do and does not do it, to him it is sin." So let me just simply ask, I'm speaking to both male and female. Has God been prodding you to do something, to make a corrective action, to change a behavior, to change some verbiage, to change an attitude, to change a belief system of which you've just dug your heels in and refused to change? If that is true, it's called sin. So when Dawn says to me, "Honey, it would help me if," it is incumbent on me to put a plan into place to act upon that. The next level, we encourage you to have this, as we've already said, at least once a week. At least once a week, every 7 days. That means nothing goes, no issue, no celebration or anything, because sometimes we need to celebrate. We move on to the next thing and we don't celebrate that big thing. We need to celebrate it. We said it last night, what gets rewarded gets repeated. It meant a lot to me when you fill that in. Next level of intimacy is spiritual intimacy. This is just our own personal experience. We have found that spiritual intimacy is enhanced by three things: spiritual conversations, regular prayer together, and service together. Spiritual conversations. I cannot tell you in the early years how many devotionals I bought with the intent of Dawn and I to read a devotional together and to grow to be more like Christ together by reading that devotional. Those daggum devotionals created more anger and outbursts and fights between us than anything good. I almost wanted to burn them. Now, I'm being somewhat facetious, but I had to learn. For us, the better way to do this was to adapt spiritual conversations. If we were sitting in your seat, what we would say on the drive home is, what was your biggest takeaway from the weekend? What stood out to you from what Dawn said, or what stood out to you from what Scott said, or what we read, or the point? Was there any pushback to anything that you heard, anything you disagree on? I'm telling you guys, we've garnered more traction spiritually just by adopting spiritual conversations. Does that make sense? Regular prayer, we talked about last night, doing that. We pray daily over meals, and I'm not discounting that. That's important, that's crucial. But the intentional time where we gather on Friday morning at 10 and intercede for one another and for those that we love, that is so intentional, so crucial to creating higher levels of spiritual intimacy between the two of us. And then service together. We'll talk more about that in the next session, so I'm not going to belabor that. Physical intimacy. This helps establish a deeper bond, And I would say to you, here's the thing that I want to encourage you, and I think it's in one of our questions here at the end. Yeah, it's the fourth question in this section. How would you define intimacy? Because intimacy to you, I can almost guarantee you, is not going to be how your partner defines intimacy. And it's important that we both understand how each person defines intimacy, if it's emotional, if it's spiritual, if it's verbal, if it's physical. It's not uncommon that we're working with a couple where one partner loves touch like this. I was working with a couple recently that any kind of touch like this in this setting, her wanting him to hold her hand or put his arm around her, he feels like that's a little awkward. He doesn't believe in PDA, public display of affection. And it's rooted largely in his family of origin. But once again, learning what intimacy is, what is appropriate here in terms of touch that can create a bond between us. It builds trust, it builds intimacy, and it builds closeness. Kevin Lehman, in his book Sheet Music years ago, wrote this phrase, and I thought there's a lot of truth to that. He said, for men, sex is the great problem eraser. In the sense that when Dawn and I connect intimately through sexual intimacy, in that moment and after that moment, there is a period of time that all the problems of the world seem to fade away. Am I right, men, or am I wrong? Okay. All right, Donna, you. But listen, guys, here's the converse of that. For our wives, problems often become the great sex eraser. If our wives are not feeling good about themselves, not feeling emotionally or relationally, spiritually connected to us, or there's other issues in their world, it's going to erase their desire. Let me just simply ask it this way. Is there a reason that maybe she does not desire intimacy at the level that you do? Are there other ways of connecting with her spiritually, relationally, verbally, checking in? How are we doing that? And I'm not saying doing this in a manipulative way to garner something. I'm just saying, guys, maybe you and I need to do a better job of preparing their heart for it. Not in this barbarian way, hey girl, let's go, but preparing her. Physical intimacy prevents feelings of loneliness and neglect. So real quick, let me give you 4 practical ways to reconnect regularly. First one is just what we just said, the regular check-ins, those 3 questions. Number 2 is practice active listening. If you've got your devices or your phones, I want you to look at James 1:19. This is the half-brother of Jesus, James 1:19, and he says it this way. He says, "This you know, my beloved brethren, let everyone be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger." Look at what he says here, verse 20, "For the anger of man does not achieve the righteousness of God." Inevitably, what happens for couples if they're not practicing active listening is they invert this verse and they become slow to hear, quick to speak, and quick to anger. They flip the script upside down. And if that's you, I want to encourage you, be careful. Practice active listening. Here's how you do it. Give your undivided attention. Remove any kind of distractions. Undivided attention, remove any distractions. I remember when I was in high school, my mom was getting on to me about something, and my bedroom was down this long hallway in our house, and I started walking away from her and was walking towards my bedroom, and my mom said to me, "Don't walk away from me while I'm talking to you." And I said, "I can hear you, Mother." But what she was saying is, "Scott, I want you to give me your undivided attention. Because walking away from me is a sign of disrespect. Give me your focused attention. Give your undivided attention. Remove any distractions. If it's your device or it's the children, sometimes you may have to say to the toddlers, this is mom and dad's personal time. We need you to go play, go to your room. We'll give us 15 minutes and then we'll come interact with you. Paraphrase what you've heard. Ask clarifying questions. Help me understand. Listen between the lines. We work with couples on this all the time of not just hearing the words. Okay, I heard you say this, so from what I'm hearing you say, I am inferring this. Is that right? And then your partner gives you some feedback. Well, yeah, I did say that, but I meant you to hear it this way. Because often, guys, in communication, we say this and they hear that. And that's why we want to get clarified. Let's make sure you're hearing what I'm saying. This is why I'm listening between the lines. The next one is simply just control your response. Control your response, because this is reality, guys. If we want to walk in the Spirit, Galatians 5:22 and 23, the very last fruit of the 9 fruit, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness. Number 9, self-control. If you want to be self-controlled in your marriage, self-control requires us to respond in the Spirit and not react in the flesh. Our knee-jerk reaction, the very first thought that comes to mind, or the thing that we say, or the thing that we do, just knee-jerk, rarely ever is that guided by the Spirit. That's more often than not guided by the flesh, following long-established sinful habits. That's the flesh. But when we're self-controlled and we're controlling our response to what we're hearing, we're actively listening, we hear something and we process it through the Spirit, not our flesh. Does that make sense? The third practical way to reconnect regularly, I like this. I think this rule is a rule that is a realistic rule for most couples. Very first one, the 777 rule. Every 7 days, go on a date. Now, I'm not saying that needs to be extravagant, expensive. I'm just saying carve out. Friday is our day off. And so on Fridays after I play pickleball and I lose and I come home mad and we pray like we did yesterday. After prayer, we
buy groceries for Bill and Normie.
Yes, that's right. We're in the sandwich generation of parenting our parents and our kids. Mm-hmm. And but we will often do breakfast together. And that's just a great little date for us. Yep. Doesn't have to be expensive. Every 7 weeks, go out for the night. Go away for the night, I should say, every 7 weeks. And this obviously is according to what your budget constraints can do. If possible, every 7 months, go away on a romantic getaway. Let me challenge the men here. for you to take the intentionality to plan a trip away, even if it's just a night away, to set up even the childcare with your parents or friends or whoever, for you men to intentionally do that, you are going to woo your wife's heart like nothing else. Because what that says is he's not just flying by the seat of his pants, he's actually being proactive. Does that make sense? Agree with me, ladies? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
We need y'all to be as loud as Francois
That's right.
on that
Yeah,
one.
that's right.
That's right.
And then finally, engage in shared activities you both enjoy. Listen, there were things that you did, and it's always interesting to me when I'm working with a couple premaritally, and they do these things. She's going fishing with him, she's going hunting with him, he's going antiquing with her and all that. I don't say it suspiciously, but I'm like, do you really enjoy that? Or are you just doing it right now? Because if you're going fishing with him or going hunting or you're going antiquing or whatever it is that your partner likes to do premaritally, there's going to be almost this level of expectation. Well, I thought we used to do this when we were dating. So find these activities that you do enjoy together. I will say, we go into Croatia last week. There was something, we spoke at the New Works here recently. And I will tell you, there was such a fulfillment for us because of what God has done in and through us by his grace and mercy, having nothing to do with us, that Dawn even made this, how did you say it, honey?
Yeah, I love what we get to do together.
I love what we get to do together. And the fact that God has, through his kindness, as we said earlier, has directed us to this point. And it's only his grace and mercy.